So we are back in our document and we are going to make a nicer material for our floor plane. So the plan is to make a procedural texture. We haven't done that before, so let's go to the shading layout and make a procedural texture. After that we have to bake the procedural texture into a normal texture because a procedural texture can only be used in Blender. So let's select the floor plane, and let's have a look at the material we have here. We have a principled BSDF shader here, and normally a texture would be connected to that in the base color. The texture we have here is a texture we use for the influence of the particles. We have a use for that later, so let's put that aside. And let's build this procedural texture. Let's first find some empty space. Let's hit Shift A to find the textures. We have all sorts of textures, like the image texture we used before, but we have a lot more, and let's try the checkered texture to explain what a procedural texture is. So connect the output to the input of the base color, and now we have a checkered texture. We can change the color, for example, make the second color red. We can change the scale. We can also add something to the vector input here, also to change scale, position, rotation. But we'll do that later on because this checkered texture is something as an example of what a procedural texture is. So instead of projecting an image texture on a mesh, we project a generated texture on a mesh. So let's delete the checkered texture and let's hit Shift A again and add a noise texture. Now the noise texture has two outputs. It has a vector output and a color output. Let's connect the color output to the base color now. You see we have some colors. Hit Shift A and go to Converter and select Color Ramp. Now you can drop the color ramp from the node that goes from the noise texture to the principled BSDF. That way it will connect by itself. Now the vector output here, if you connect that straight to the base color input, it will give sort of the same result. But that's not what we want, because we want to have influence over the colors that can be used. And we can do that with the color ramp. So the color ramp uses all the colors that are produced by the procedural texture and converts that into a range from the colors used in the color ramp. For example, we can drag this first color and the darker part will go darker. Same goes for the lighter parts, but the other way around. That's a little bit harder to see. So maybe not completely true, but by dragging on these slides, we change the contrast of the color we get from the procedural texture. And because we don't use any color, let's use the vector out and the vector in, which in this case is the same, but just looks nicer. So we have the noise texture here, and the first thing we'll do is we'll change the scale because it's way too big. So you can drag here and you can see what the result is live, but we can also just type in a number, and the number I'm choosing is 50. We do not have any color yet, so that's a little bit dull for sand, so let's give it some color. Let's look at the color ramp and look at the first slide here, and that's the darker parts on the texture here, and the lighter parts here are the lighter parts. Now let's click on this dark slider. You see these small lines next to it. That means it's selected. Then click on the color here below. And let's change that to a brownish, beige, sandy color. I think that's beige enough, but needs to be a little bit darker. So let's select the other side. When you select it, it's a little bit hard to see. So let's make this a little bit bigger first. So when it's light, it's selected, and also the line above it is a little bit dashed. Hard to see, but well, okay. So open up the color, and with the color selector we can select the first color again. Now we have the same color on both sides, so let's make one darker. Make it darker, and then we have two colors. That's the value, 0.2. Now this could represent sand. See? We can also flip the colors by going under this arrow here and say flip color ramp. See if that makes a difference. I don't know. Let's leave it like this. There's no real difference. So let's crank the roughness up a little bit. This gives a more sandy-like effect. Let's make it a little bit bigger. You can't see it like that. You see, that's giving a little bit more twist, more shape to the noise. I don't know what it does, but it looks cool to me. So now we have this noise texture projected on our mesh, but we didn't use any UV coordinates. And you can see that because on the side here it's a little bit small. It's a little bit squashed together. So let's add some more nodes. Let's add a Shift A, go to Vector and then choose Mapping. Mapping is used to, let's connect vector to vector first, and that's used to change the position, the location the rotation and the scale of the texture. Scale is used there as well, but that's okay, that's just the same. And now on the mesh we don't see the texture anymore, and that's because by default, when there is nothing in there, the generated method of projection is used. So if I connect it, it doesn't know what to do anymore, so we need to add something more. So Shift A, input, and add a texture coordinate node. Here you see generated, that's what it is on by default. Let's deconnect it, because that is not what we want. Because what we want is to use the UV coordinates from the UVs we created earlier. Let's step into edit mode, and there's the floor's UV map. So instead of generated, let's use UV. So let's connect UV to vector, this one, and then vector to vector again. Voila, we have a nice unsquashed UV map. You see here on the sides it's not squashed anymore. If you do it like this, the sides are squashed, and when you put it in there, the texture is nicely distributed over the mesh with help of these UVs. Now we are not done yet. We want a second procedural texture because only sand is just not enough. We also need some green moss or next to the soil that goes underneath the grass. So let's go. Let's put this texture here aside, don't delete it, because we need it later on. Select all these nodes, hit Shift D to duplicate them all and drag them down a bit. And then let's go to the first part again and zoom in a bit. Let's first change the color. So instead of brown we need green. So pick a green, something like this. Maybe pick a color from the well for consistency, you know. There you go, that's better. On the other side, again we will color pick the first colors. So now everything has the same color again. So let's make one side lighter. Click on the color and drag the value bar up. Maybe a little bit too light, let's drag it down again. And make the darker part a little bit darker. Let's see, flip it around. Does it anything? Again, it doesn't really make a difference for me. So, okay. So now we have two procedural textures. We have a brown one and we have a green one. And somehow we want to have them both on the model. How do we do that? So let's drag this aside and add a node, and it's called Shift A, color, go to Mix RGB. So a Mix RGB node. Let's make this a little bit bigger so we can see what we are doing. And then let's put the color in the base color here so we can see what the Mix RGB does. We have two colors, both white. Let's make one red. And now the color is a mix of these two colors because the factor is set at 0.5. Now when we set it on 0, the first color is used. And when we set it on 1, the second color is used. Now instead of using a number, we can also use a texture to influence this color. Now we have this grass influence texture. And that's exactly what we need. So let's put the output, or let's first move it a little bit closer so we can see what we are doing. So let's put the output, the color output, into the vector. And hey, look at that. Exactly what we need. So the grass influence texture is now influencing this Mix RGB node. And with that, the way the color projects on the model. But now you don't want to use these two colors, but you want to use these procedural textures. So let's drag this aside, and what we will do is drag this up there, and then we use the color of this procedural texture and put it in the first color of the Mix RGB, and the second procedural texture we put in the second color of the Mix RGB, and ooh, look at that, the wrong way around. So let's turn them around. It's crossed now, but it doesn't matter for now. Let's do that better later. But look, there is some green moss under the grass. So everything that's white there is green, and everything that's black there has the brown color. And just to be neat and nice, let's change these around. So let's drag this down there, and then pick them both up and drag them up again. There you go. Now these two are exactly the same. So the texture coordinate and the mapping. So we can delete one and just use the output there and put it in the vector input here. We didn't change the position, rotation or scale there, so we can just use that. And when I look at the sand now, I think it looks a little bit like mud and not like sand. So let's do something with the scale. Let's have a look. Let's set it to 250. Oh, that's the green part. Let's put it on 250 here. That looks better. Maybe 200. Yes. So the scale of the sand is set on 200. We're almost done, but there's one thing I don't like. It is the moss it stops too early. It should be a little bit bigger. So we can influence that by using this texture here and add something to it. So Shift A, go to Converter and add a color ramp again. Now with it still selected, drag it over the node here and it will be automatically connected in the correct way. So what we can do now is we can influence this texture, the fall off here, by dragging on these sliders. So let's drag the white part up. You see what happens in the texture on the model? It also changes the shape of the edge a bit, but that's okay. It's a little bit harder. So we can do it like this. We can also drag the dark part up that way, so we can go the other way around. Then the green part gets smaller. And while it works, I think there's a better method because I don't have enough control here. Especially when I zoom out. You come to the end, it just snaps and doesn't really work that well. So let's try something else. Let's delete the color ramp. And instead of a color ramp, let's add a color and a RGB curve. Let's put the color in the color and the color in the vector. Nothing happens first because nothing changes. Everything that goes in is the same as that goes out. So when I drag on this part here, for example, everything that is 0, so black, is getting a higher value. Okay, so we don't want that. We want to influence the green part. So let's drag that part up again. And then zoom in. And now we can make a nice curve. That makes the edge less harder as well. So there's a little bit more control. The color goes a little bit over the edge, that's nice. Let's focus. Let's have a look. It's a little bit like a 90s texture, that's correct, because in the 90s we used a lot of procedural textures in games. Or tiled, repeated textures. It's not the same, but comes pretty close. And you know me by now. Of course you can paint in a much nicer texture, because I like to do things with control and paint things in. But just so you know that this is possible in Blender, that you can make materials by use of procedural textures. And this is all very nice procedural textures, but we can only use this in Blender, so we need a way to make a normal texture, a normal image texture, so we can use that in an external program like Unreal Engine, Unity, or for example, Sketchfab. Okay, so let's first remove this texture from the texture slot by clicking on the cross, and let's make a new one. And let's make this T_floor_base color. Let's keep it on 1024, that's a nice size. Keep alpha on, no. Let's turn it off because I want to explain something later about textures with and without alpha. And you know what, 512 is big enough because we don't really have that much detail in here. So let's put it on 512 pixels, width and height, and hit OK. And now we have a black texture here, name is correct, OK. Now let's go to edit mode so we can see the UV map. There you go. Now let's go to the shader here, or let's first go to the render panel here. We are on Eevee and we need cycles to bake because Eevee doesn't have any bake options. So let's put it on GPU. That's your graphic card, so that's a lot faster. And let's not forget to save, because baking and rendering, which is pretty much the same thing, is very processor intense. So let's save because we might crash. And of course it opens on the second window, so let's change the name here. We didn't even do that yet, so okay. Procedural, texture, correct folder. Let's see. Yes. Nothing there yet. Yes, save. Okay, so we are on cycles instead of Eevee. Oops. Cycles, GPU. I don't know why it's grayed out, but okay. Let's go to bake here. And now we need to let Blender know where we want to bake to. So we need a new texture node. So Shift A, texture and image texture. And here make sure it's on the right texture. So the texture floor base color, same as we made here. Make sure this is selected. So click next to it and then click on it again. The bake type is on combined, but we need diffused, so put it on diffuse. Deselect direct and indirect, so only color is on, and click on bake. And let's see what happens. You can follow the scroll bar below, 100%, and there you go. There is a baked texture. Now let's save it. Image, save as, and hello, there we are. So let's go to our texture folder, Blender Udemy, textures. Name is correct. Okay, let's save. So we can disconnect the procedural texture here. Just drag the color input away and take the color output of our new texture and put it in the base color. Now go to object mode and there we have our texture. Now I think the edge is not that nice yet, so let's change that, and I'll be switching to my Wacom. So I'm on my Wacom now. And now let's have a look at the edge of our texture, because I want to paint something in there, or rather sort of out there. I want to erase the edge so that we have a nicer shape here. So just erase the paint, don't change the mesh. And sometimes the blend modes work in a strange way, so we'll have to have a good look at that. It's probably just me, but sometimes I just think it's not working the way it should. But it's maybe because I'm used to other programs, like Photoshop or something, and it sometimes just works a little bit different here. So, but it's not a problem. We can always work around that. So let's open the Materials tab. Make sure you have the floor selected. And let's scroll down and have a look at the blend modes. Alpha is on 1. It's not used, and that is because we don't have the alpha plugged in from the texture. You see here alpha is on 1, so there's no alpha at all. And if you want to use alpha, you have to use the alpha texture, so you have to plug that in there. But just remember, we didn't have any alpha on this texture. It's an RGB texture, you can see that there. That's because we turned alpha off when we created this texture. But now we want to add alpha, and we can do that by doing image, save as. So we'll save over the previous texture. Let's drag this in here again. And here you see its color is either on black and white, RGB or RGBA, where RGB is red, green, blue, and RGBA, red, green, blue, alpha. So we need alpha, so let's click on that and we'll have alpha in our texture. Now the name is red, so we already have something with the same name there. We can either do save as or make an extra one, but I'll just save over it. So here in the image editor, hit N, and under image, reload the image. It's probably already in there, but just to be sure. And here you can see now it's RGBA. Cool. Now we can use alpha. So that's one thing. Now another thing we need to do is, and let's make this a little bit bigger again, like so. So when you look at the model, and let's have a closer look. When I put this on, let's see, where am I? We are still on cycles, let's put it on Eevee. Then go back to materials and go down in the blend mode. It's opaque, so it doesn't have any alpha. We also have alpha blend, alpha hashed, alpha clip. Let's put an alpha clip for now. And now it's either on or off. So the alpha, the see-through parts are either on or off with a threshold of 0.5. You can adjust the threshold here. Let's go to the texture pane layout to explain some of this. Let's make the 3D viewport a bit bigger, like so. Zoom in and let's have a look at the material. Scroll down a bit. the blend mode is on alpha clip now. Let's choose a brush and let's set the blend mode on erase alpha. And instead of setting it on a strength of 1, I'll set it on a strength of 0.7. Now when I erase part of this texture here, everything I brush over is erased because I'm painting with a strength of 0.7 and that is above the threshold of 0.5. So that's what alpha clip does. Now let's turn it on alpha blend and immediately you see the shape of the brush. So the fall off you see there's a gradient with a fall off of the brushes because the brush has a soft fall off. I used a particle brush, but okay, let's use the soft brush now. Put it on erase alpha again. Ctrl Z to go back. And then let's see if the strength sensitivity is turned off. Nope, turn it off. And then let's draw. And we'll see this soft edge now. We can use that, but maybe I'll use a harder edge. So let's try that. Ctrl Z again. And let's go to the hard brush. Let's again put it on erase alpha. Make it bigger. And let's see. Oh, turn strength sensitivity off. Now we draw once. You see we have 30% paint left. And when we draw again, everything is gone. So this way you can make some nice stylized edges. For example, like this. Just draw like this and just nibble it off. Nibble, is that a word? I don't know. So when you play with it a bit, you get some ragged edges. You can do it nicer than I do now, probably, but okay. Let's undo all of that. And let me show you another problem I have with the blend modes. So when I use alpha blend, again, same as with the grass, I have these strange artifacts. I can see through parts of the mesh. I don't think that's correct. And also when I paint now, I'll paint through everything. That's something else. That's of course the occlude and backface color that's turned off. So let's turn it on. So I can't paint straight through the mesh. Ctrl Z and let's test that again. Let's paint. Yeah, now I'm not painting through the mesh anymore, but we still have these strange artifacts. So I have an option called show backface, and when I turn that off, that's the one right over here, it will solve my problems. I don't know what it is, because normally it shouldn't be. You can't see a backface through a mesh, but turn it off and voila, it works. So now I can erase the paint and I have no problems. It works just as it should. Right? I also do not see the faces that are in the back, but we don't really need to see them anyway. So, okay, to recap all of this, go to the Materials tab and under Settings in the Blend mode, set it on Alpha Blend, Show Backface, turn it off. Have a look at these settings, because I think it's quite a lot to grasp in one go. So just have a look. I use a hard brush and put the blend mode on erase alpha. Set the strength on 0.7 and pressure sensitivity off and scroll down. It's full white, so I'll erase with 100% of that 0.7 strength. And under options, occlude and backface coloring should be turned on. The stroke method is on space. And you know what we can do is, because we are working on the brushes anyway, let's make a new brush for this. So let's click on the copy button here. Let's change the name to Eraser Hard. Eraser Hard. Let's delete the rest. Not the D. And let's give it a number. That should be number 4. Because the particle brush here was not number 1, but number 3. 3. Okay, so we have hard brush. Let's go there and let's set that back on mix. The rest is okay probably. Soft brush. Let's copy that one as well. and make a soft eraser. So let's call this number 5, yes, eraser soft. And let's erase the rest. Already it's on erase alpha. Let's put it on exactly 0.7 strength. Oh, soft. There's something with this last letter again. Okay, the rest should be good. So now we have a soft and a hard eraser. Let's go to eraser hard. Let's see, everything looks good. So let's make this smaller. Let's hide it and let's start making a nicer edge. So let's focus on this window. And I'd like to draw in something like this. Let's make this edge just a little bit more interesting than a straight edge. Not mistaken for straight edgers, people who don't drink alcohol and stuff like that, don't use drugs, right? Nothing to do with this course, of course. We are making a non-straight edge. And let's rotate. Let's do it on this side as well. Remember, hit 6 to rotate. Let's delete that part. If you like to do it different, feel free. Feel free to do whatever you want. You can also use a straight edge, but make sure that you make a decision and not just do it because you are lazy. Which you are not, I'm pretty sure. Else you wouldn't be this far in this course, because by now you found that painting is nothing about being lazy. It's hard work and it's not easy. And you'll find that the more work you put into it, the better you get. It's all practice. And you can never practice enough. Another thing is, you'll never finish painting. You never finish getting better. It's something for life. Okay, enough philosophy here. This is the edge now. Just a little bit more interesting. We could put an accent on the entrance here by erasing a little bit more. A bigger brush maybe, and they just make this a little bit higher. Erase. Something like that, okay? That's a nicer edge than what we had before, right? Don't you agree? Let's keep it like this. Let's hit Control Space to go into the normal texture paint layout. Let's drag this in a bit. And on the texture we have parts of it erased now. So let's erase a little bit more just to make sure that we don't leave any small pieces of paint behind that we don't want there. A little bit strange way of putting it maybe, but okay. Let's put it on 1 strength. Let's put it on line. And let's erase the last parts. Like so. And the last bit. If you want, you can erase the corners as well, but it's not really necessary because that's far away enough from the edge we have now. Let's save the image. Save. So let's have a look at the edge. Yep, that's nice. So that's the end of this course. We're in half an hour now. That's pretty cool, because we did a terrible lot in this half hour. Okay, that's it. In the next lecture we will make a nicer render. So we'll fix some things first, because the grass is way too light now. We'll render in both Eevee and cycles, just to show you what the difference is in render capabilities. See you in the next lecture. I say bye bye.